All right, so up until now, we've been using Django to create full stack web applications. So that means it's an application where the front end and the back end are linked and part of the same code base. And in general, this isn't necessarily the most efficient way of doing things. It can work for smaller projects, but say you wanted to build something like a Facebook or an Amazon, if you build everything in one single code base, it rapidly becomes monolithic, just this huge application. And the bigger your application is, it could be hundreds and thousands or even millions of lines of code. Debugging and adding new features just becomes a nightmare because just everything is so interconnected that way. Which is why most modern companies are using concepts of microservices and service-oriented architecture. So a microservice is kind of the idea that, all right, everything in our application is kind of its own smaller application that can be linked to other parts of the project. So it's kind of, essentially the same idea when we say you should take a function and refactor it for a single responsibility, so that everything in the app does exactly one thing. So from now on, we're going to be moving towards a model where the front end and the back end are separate code bases. So we're going to start using Django as an API to handle reading and writing from the database, and then React JavaScript to handle all of our front end logic. So the user interacts with the React app, but all of the data is handled by our Django application. So what we're going to be doing as an example today is we're going to be creating a Django API to keep track of different types of wine, and we're going to be returning JSON instead of HTML. So kind of like when we were working on Ticketmaster, we used the Ticketmaster API and got JSON back. So we're going to be doing that on our own at this stage. So first off, I'm going to create a database for my application. So I'll call this wine API. So now if I do PSQL wine API, I should, yep, it exists. And I know it's been a while since we've done Django, so I'll try to take this as slow as I can. So first, I'm going to set up my virtual environment. Then I'm going to activate it. Now that I've got that venv there, I know I'm in my virtual environment, so I can pip install Django. And then I'm going to pip install scopg2. And I'm going to clear my screen. And now I'm going to actually start the project by doing Django admin start project wine API. There it is. Gonna open this up. And then I'm going to Python, gotta activate my source venv bin activate again. Python manage.py. I think I need to cd into manage.py, start app wines. All right. It's all looking familiar, all coming back? All right, so now I'm going to make a model for my wine. So I'll call this class wine. It's going to inherit from models.model. And we're going to give our wine a name. It's going to be models.charfield equals 255. We're going to give it a price. We're going to give it a varietal. So whether it's a Sauvignon Blanc or a Malbec or what have you. And then we're going to give it a description. And after that, I'm going to make a dunder string method so that we can just look at this. We're going to just say return self.winename. So that way, when we look at it, it'll just return the name instead of an ID and wine object. All right. Any questions about Django so far before we keep going?
Will we need to link the settings in, or is that just the step that we haven't gotten to yet?
We're going to do that next. Yes,
okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Yep, so that is the next step. We're going to go to settings. I'm going to go to, first I'm going to change my database because the engine is not SQLite 3 anymore. Now it's PostgreSQL. And instead of this, we're going to be using our wine API database. And then I'm going to go to installed apps and I'm going to register wines. Now that we've done all that, we should be able to Python manage.py make migrations. And then we should be able to Python manage.py migrate. All right, no errors. That looks good. All right, now that we've done that, we need to create some dummy data to work with. So got to remember how to set up a shell. One sec, I've completely forgotten, and that happens sometimes. Django shell.
I think it's Python manage.py and then shell.
Let's try that. There we go. Thank you. So I should be able to see wine. Uh-oh, wine is not defined.
Oh, if you want the auto imports for that, you have to do the extended shell or whatever that's called.
Shell plus, I believe.
You have to have Django extensions installed.
You're right. So let's do that. Pip install.
Then after that, you have to add it to like line 41.
Is it Django dash extensions or Django underscore extensions? We'll find out.
It's
dash
for the
install,
pip.
but it's underscore for the install apps, which is awesome.
Yeah, odd bit of anti-pattern there, as we say. All right, so now if I do Python manage.py shell plus, there we go. Now we have our wine class available. So we can say, W1 equals wine. Let's make sure I know exactly what it is. So we have a wine name. equals Noah's specialty. Price is $100. Varietal equals Malbec. Description equals very tasty, I promise. So execute w1.save. So now it's been, if I do wine.objects.all, we should see it there. Great. So I can make another wine. W2 equals wine equals code platoon red. Price equals varietal equals, I don't know wines that well. Merlot. Also quite good. And then we'll make
quick question. We're doing this obviously in the shell, and we're using two lines. First, we're saving it to a variable. I wasn't sure. I thought there was a way we could do like wine.create or wine, and wouldn't that automatically just do that without having to do the save method?
Yep, you're right.
I just wasn't sure if there's a reason for one practice versus the other.
It's actually wine.objects.create. .objects is the model manager.
Thank you.
That's the one that has the create method on it. But you do use this way, or you can use this way if you have all of the information at the time of creation. If you don't have every required field, it will raise a exception because it won't be able to create it, so it raises an exception. So a lot of times the times you see when you create an object like Noah did for W2, you do it
when
in
you're
form.
trying to add like a parent ID or something, or a parent object.
Yeah, you're messing you're adding something that wasn't. It's usually during form processing was when you see it, like when you're trying to attach a user, the current logged in user, to the object, because it's not part of the data that you already had. Yeah, you don't want the user sending their ID or something in them manually. You want to get that yourself, and then you do a .save because you attach the user and then do a .save.
Well said, Chris. Thank you. So I'll call this one Vineyard a la Preet. I'm sure I'm spelling this wrong. So now if I do wine.objects.all, I should see 3 wine objects. Noah specialty, code platoon red, and Vineyard a la Preet. So now we have some data we can work with, and we can continue on setting up our API. Any questions before we get into that part? Okay. So first I'm going to head to the projects urls.py. And I'm going to make sure that I am not just getting from Django.urls importing path, I'm also importing include. And then I'm going to say path to wines. And we're going to include wines.urls. Now I need to make wines.urls. Oops, just have to say urls.py. And I'm going to, from Django.urls, import path. I'm going to say from this import views. And we're going to set up URL patterns as an array. And we're going to set up a few routes. So first I'm going to set one for the home page. I'm just going to go to our wines list. So we're going to make something called views.winelist. Name equals wine list. We're going to make one for a path for making something new. Call that views.newWine. Name equals new wine. We'll have one if you want to view a particular wine. So we're going to do that by wine ID. So int wine ID goes to views.wine detail. And we'll name this wine detail. We'll have one if you want to edit a particular wine. So int wine ID /edit. Views.edit wine. Name equals edit wine. And then finally, we'll have one if you want to delete a particular wine. So we'll have int wine ID /delete, which will go to views.delete wine. And name equals delete wine. All right. So when I say keep on saying, views.winelist, views.newWine, views.wine detail, what am I referring to here?
Your function. Go ahead.
I was going to say, besides referencing the file, basically in the model view controller stream, you're looking at the controller in this particular case.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, so we're going to be going to our controller, which is called views.py. I'm always upset about this because, the views are what I normally think of as what we actually see as opposed to the controller, but that's what we have to work with. And normally we use this from Django.shortcuts import render so that we can render a template. But since we're making an API, we don't need templates anymore, so we can get rid of this. Instead, we're going to be doing from Django.http. We're going to import something called JSON response. We're also going to do a few other things from Django.views.decorators.csrf. We're going to import CSRF exempt, which is going to help our forms get through, because we're not going to have a form with a CSRF token like we would normally. From .forms, we're going to import something called wineform, and we're going to get into what these are soon. From .models, I'm going to import wine. And then from .serializers, I'm going to import something called wine serializer, which is also something we're going to have to make. So now I'm going to make the methods that we outlined in our wines URLs. So first I'm going to make my wine list. And we always take request as an argument for these methods. And we're going to say wines equals wine.objects.all. And then what I want to do is I want to make sure I can essentially render every wine object in my database as JSON. And there's no way to do that natively. So we need to create something that'll be able to convert all of these wine objects into JSON for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder. Or no, I just need to create a file, not a folder. I'm going to call this one serializers.py. And a serializer's job is just to to convert data from one format to another. So I want to convert a Django query object into JSON. So I'm going to, from built-ins, I'm going to import object. I'm going to make a class called wine serializer. That inherits from object. I'm going to give it an init method, which takes self and body as arguments. And self.body equals body. And we're going to give this some properties. So I'm going to say at property def all wines. And so we're going to convert all the wines into a JSON object. So I'm going to create something called output. I'm going to set that equal to an object or a dictionary in Python's case. It's going to have a key called wines, which points to an empty array. And I'm going to say for wine in self.body. So the body is going to represent essentially whatever we pass it in, which in this case for wine list is going to be all of the wines. Then we're going to create a dictionary called wine details. I'm going to say wine name. It's going to be wine.wine name. Price is going to be wine.price. Varietal can equal wine.varietal. And description can equal wine.description. And then after that, we're going to say output wines dot append our wine details. And at the end of this, we should return the output. So all I'm doing here is I am converting the Django query object into a regular object that can then be converted into JSON without any trouble. So now that I've done that, I can come back here and I can say serialized wines equals wine serializer, passing in all those wines as an argument, and we're invoking the all wines property. And then we're going to return a JSON response where the data is going to equal serialized wines. Wow, I cannot type today. And the status is going to equal 200. So now that we've done that, I'm going to try to run the server.
Do we need to stringify anything in this process, or is that kind of hidden magic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, JSON response will do that for us. All right, it's taking its sweet time with it. All right, well, that's going. Oh, something happened. Oh, right. I don't have this forms thing yet. I'm going to comment that out and reload. All right, so Right, I have to define all these methods. So I'm not going to do anything yet. I'm just going to make sure they exist. I actually don't know if passing is going to do it is going to work well enough. We'll find out. No, new wine, not new wines. Okay, there we go. So now I should be able to go to localhost 8000 /wines. And I have my now serialized wines converted into a nice readable JSON object. All right, any questions about what we've done so far?
So for the actress, no, it's at property. I know that was intended to create an object without having to create another instance of a class, but I don't really see why that's useful yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and essentially it's another way of doing things. Instead of making this a method, we're essentially saying treat this as a property of the wine serializer class. It's a choice. It's, you know, essentially another way of looking at things and going, okay, what can I do to make this, you know, I just figured it was more readable this way. But
I just didn't know. I still didn't really quite understand why those were useful. That's all the reason I was asking.
That's all right.
Noah, if you want, I can probably answer.
Yeah, if you have any insight, Chris, I'd be happy to hear it.
Yeah, so Kanisha, you see how Noah has self.body equals body, just setting an instance attribute on wine serializer. And the way that Noah would access that later is after you create an instance of wine serializer, you can say .body, and it just spits out that whatever was stored in there, that's what spits out, right?
Okay.
So the at property is a decorator. It wraps around this entire all wines function. A decorator is just a function that wraps another function, and it does something with the return value of the inner function. So the only thing that happens, the main thing that happens right here is it basically lets you interact with all wines. Instead of interacting with it as a function, it lets you interact with it as you would like self.body. So you can create an instance of wine serializer and then say .all wines without putting parentheses. And then this way it's more of like a calculated attribute. Because in self.body, you see how it doesn't really have any actual, like, it's not doing logic, right? It's not doing any calculations. It's not doing any for loops, but all wines itself, it's actually doing all this extra logic, and you want to treat it like you would or like a wine serializer, like this .body attribute, right? Like you want to say that, but you also still want to run this for loop. It lets you treat it like an attribute and not like a function. It's like syntactic sugar, basically.
Okay. So is the property, is that a special term? Because I remember
It's a built-in, yeah.
Yeah, a long time ago, like it would be when we were talking, we had a staff class or something, and it would be asterisk all staff or something like that. And that didn't seem like it was built, like you said it was a built-in keyword before, but that time it didn't. I was just kind of wondering what the difference between the two were. I think I might take this one offline though. But yeah, I got that part, what you just described earlier.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it's doing. But if you want to go more in depth about where it comes from, we can do that offline. That's fine.
I just wanted to say properties, they're bindable, and they can be used in interfaces, while fields, they're just specific to the class. So I mean, that's like a big deal. You can act like in an object language like Python, you can do just a tremendous amount more with the properties that with the fields you're not able to manipulate like you can with the properties.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions about the serializer or the views.py so far? All right, so I'm going to move on to my next method, wine detail. So we get wine ID passed in from the URL. So you can say wine equals wine.objects.get, where ID equals wine ID. And then we want to serialize just one wine instead of all of our wines. So we're going to have to make one more method, our wine serializers class. So I'm going to give it another property. I'm going to call this one wine detail. And we're just going to return a single dictionary this time. And I'm actually just going to copy out this entire dictionary here because it's going to be almost the same thing. Oops, did not mean to Control X. Control C. And just instead of wine.winename, it has to be self.body. And that's all I need to do for that. So now I can say serialized wine equals wine serializer data, passing in wine as the body, dot wine detail. And then we're going to return a JSON response where data equals serialized wine and status equals 200. So now I should be able to visit wine number 1. What happened? Invalid syntax.
I think I had to do with the in your URLs, whether or not you appended the.
Oh no,
Return
I misspelled return.
Okay.
Return. There we go. Here's wine number 1. Here's wine number 2. Here's wine number 3. All right, so those are our GET requests. And those are pretty simple. We just serialize it and return it. But now we have our things like new wine, edit wine, and delete wine, which are more based on, okay, now the user needs to be able to interact with our thing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a decorator to all of these methods called the one we imported earlier called @CSRF_exempt. And the reason we're doing this is because when we create a form in our Django templates, we always send a CSRF token up automatically in order to kind of validate our form data. But since these are coming from these requests are going to be coming from outside of the Django app, there's not going to be a CSRF token. So we're just saying, don't look for a CSRF token here. So now I'm going to check that we're getting a post request instead of a get request. And then I need a way of getting that getting the data in. And just like how, we could create a form. When we did this with just full stack Django applications, we're going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to make a new file called forms.py. And this is just going to be a way of getting the data out of the request and into our object editor. So I'm going to say from Django, I'm going to import forms. From .models, I'm going to import wine. I'm going to create a class called wineForm equal forms.modelForm. I'm going to give it a class meta. And all I need to do now is say that the model here is wine and that the fields are wine name, price, varietal, and description. And so this forms.modelForm essentially allows us to create a new wine object from our post data. So the class meta, model equals wine, and all this pattern just lets us do that automatically. So I'm going to uncomment out this. So if we have a post request, I'm going to say form is going to equal wineForm using request.post. And then we're going to check if form.isValid. So if it's a valid form, then we're going to save that wine by calling form.save, where commit equals true. And then we are going to serialize that wine the same way we did earlier. So serialized wine equals wine serializer wine.wine detail. And then we're going to return the JSON response. Data equals serialized wine. And status equals 200. So again, kind of breaking this down. No. Oh, I forgot the double equal sign. So we make a request to the new wine endpoint. First, we're going to check that it's a post request as opposed to a get request. A get request should really just return nothing. We're going to use our wine form, this thing right here, to essentially automatically format it into a wine object that hasn't been saved to our database yet. Then we're going to check if it's valid, meaning all of the fields that are required are still required. If it is, we save it to our database, serialize it, and return it as a JSON response. So in order to test this out, I can't just do that by visiting my URLs anymore. Instead, I'm going to use Postman to make a post request to my API. So my endpoint is going to be localhost 8000 /wines/new. And is it just in params, or I always forget exactly how to make sure this works the way it's supposed to? All right, so got a wine name, a price, a varietal. I need a description. Cheap swill. So this is my form data that I'm providing here in my body. So if I send this up, let's see what happens. All right, we got a response, status 200, OK. And here's our wine name. So that implies that we did it right. And that should exist at wines 4. And there it is. All right. Any questions about how we made this post request happen?
For error handling, for instance, let's say the form is invalid, we're basically going to be calling the server through an API request. So does it automatically, if the form is not valid, does it automatically return, whatever error code that we need, or do we need to put that in at like line 25 as a return HTTP response?
Yeah, let's test that out. So I'm going to make another post request, and this time I will just send it up with nothing. Let's see what happens if I send it up with no body data. All right, in this case, we got a 500 internal server error. We can actually visualize it, maybe. Can't visualize that. What about a preview? So this is the thing we got instead. So it says view.views new wine didn't return an HTTP response, it returned none instead. So essentially what happened here is, since it didn't know what to do with an invalid form, it just returned none, and that gave us a 500 error. So we'd probably want to, instead of returning that, we'd want to do something else. So, something a little more customized. So let's see here. I'm going to try something real quick. I'm going to say, I believe there's something called form.errors that we should have access to. I'm going to say, so I'm going to return another JSON response where data equals form.errors and status equals, what's a bad request? I always forget which one that is. 401?
I thought that was not found. Isn't it like 300 or something?
Or I might just be 400 for like bad malformed data or something like that.
Yeah. Honestly, it doesn't matter what we put. It'll still work. And my server shut down for some reason. All right, so I'm going to make another bad request. Yep, in this case, we got status 400 bad request. And here are our errors. We got wine name, this field is required. Price, this field is required. Varietal, this field is required. And description, this field is required.
I think you can actually get that same error now if you send a post request, or not a post request, a GET request. I think you can make it do an exception again because you didn't handle the when it's not a post.
Yeah, so now I'm still getting a 500 internal server error if I make a GET request to /wine/new. So if I wanted to, I could create something here that's, a user would see if they make a GET request to wine/new. I'm not going to do that at this time just because, at this point I feel like, you're making for something that doesn't exist. So I'm not going to handle that right now. But yeah, that is another thing we could do, is had a error handler there saying, okay, what happens if someone makes a GET request to this endpoint? All right, any other questions? All right, so the good news about edit wine is that it's practically identical to the new wine process. So I'm literally just going to copy all of this. And apparently I've heard that kind of the new thing in vogue is essentially make everything a post request as opposed to saying, checking if it's a put request. So I'm just going to keep this as a post request, make sure it's CSRF exempt. And the only thing I need to change is for when I create my wine form, I'm not just passing in request.post. Well, first I need to get the wine. So I'm going to say wine equals wine.objects.get. where ID equals wine ID. And then in this form, I'm going to pass in instance equals wine ID. No, just wine. So I'm just saying, so this just says, all right, we're editing this instead of creating a new one. And if the form is valid, we save it, we serialize it, and we return a JSON response. And if it's not, we return a error 400. So it's practically the same thing. So now if I want to, for example, so now I'm going to say, all right, if I want to edit wine number 4, and let's say, I'm going to keep that title and description. I'm going to change the name to 20 Buck Chuck. If I send this up, oh, I made this a GET request, that's why. So now I'm going to send it up as a POST request. Now it says here, I got my wine object back. Now the name is changed to 20 Buck Chuck. If I refresh it on here, there it is. So again, editing something in an API is almost identical to creating something new. You just have that extra step of fetching the particular wine you want to use.
And if we did want to test for the, let's say the put or the patch, we could just change line 31 to like request method is in, and then you have like a list of post, put, and patch.
Yeah, you could do it something like that. So yeah, if request method in post, put, or patch. I'm not sure if it would still be formatted as request.post if it's a put request. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to make this a put request instead. Change this to 1999. Yeah, so it looked for, so it still tried to, it noticed that it was a put request and that was fine. But then it tried to look for request.post.
Okay.
So we would need to make sure that we were customizing that so that if it's a put request, it looks in request.put. So that's one reason we're kind of doing this if request method equals post, just because it's simpler. All right, and lastly, I'm going to do deleting wine, which is the simplest one of all of these three. So make this CSRF exempt. So I need to say, I'm going to first get my wine object and say if request.method equals, in this case, maybe I will say I want this specifically to be a delete method. Then in that case, I just need to do wine.delete. And then I'm going to return a JSON response where the data is going to equal a dictionary with a status, successfully deleted wine, and status equal to 200. So now to delete this wine, I should be able to make a request to wine/for/delete. I'm going to make this a delete request, send it up. We have our status, successfully deleted the wine. And if I refresh the page, we don't have that wine doesn't exist. So now we have a functional API. Any questions?
what is self.body in the line serializers.py, and what is it in the for loop exactly, or is it related to the object you're passing in or something?
Yeah. So in our views, we always pass in whatever Django object data we get from our query here into this. So that we're just calling that the body. So that can be all of our wines or one wine or some of our wine. And then for this one here, we're just looping. This is saying, all right, if we have all of the wines, we're looping over every wine in that Django objects collection, and just converting that data into an object instead of a Django query object. Because you can't, when you try to convert a Django query object into a string, you'll just get something like, wine name or ID number or something like that, as opposed to we want all of this data to essentially be unpacked so that we can convert it into text. Does that answer your question, Kanisha?
A little bit. Ask again later.
Okay. Any other questions about the API, using Django as an API?
Yeah, I think maybe another way to kind of describe it would be the self.body when we initialize it. It's all it is just a variable, and it'll hold either one or more objects, in this case, wine objects. So it'd either be one object by itself or a list of objects. And then depending on how we call the property, it'll access, it's expecting that a list to be passed in versus just one object to be passed in.
Mm-hmm.
I did actually have one question in regards to properties. I guess I could look it up, but at the same time, I think I have an alternative solution in case there was an error. Can one property, as it's annotated here, call on another property, or is that not exactly allowed within the same class?
Oh, good question.
Because the alternative, because I was trying to look at how to keep this dry, the alternative would be to take line 22 through the end and put that in as its own helper function. And then each of the other properties would either return, it'd call in the helper function and just pass in the one value, or in the loop for the other property when we're going through, each loop would send its object into this helper function.
Yeah.
But alternatively, if you were able to call on a property, I would, in the looping one, go through and call this property down here of wine detail.
Yeah.
If that was possible.
Yeah. So as written right now, that wouldn't work because wine detail directly calls on self.body instead of an argument. But if we were to reformat this in another way, we could make a method called wine detail that takes in some wine information and returns this. And that would be a drier way of doing it. You're right. All right. So I know it's been about an hour, but let's see here. Do I have enough time? Yeah, I think I'm going to stretch this out a little bit more because I'm going to do one more thing. Now that we have our API working, I want to deploy it to Heroku. So, up until now, all of our Django apps have been running on localhost 8000, which is great for developing things. But we want to deploy this to a web server that's accessible to the rest of the internet. And there are a lot of services out there that are designed to make that easier for us. The most popular is AWS, Amazon Web Services. But If any of you have tried the AWS training already, you can see it's got a pretty steep learning curve. So we're going to be using a simpler and cheaper service called Heroku. So it is actually built on top of AWS, but it abstracts away a lot of the complexity so that deploying apps is super simple, and it's also free. So first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that this project is ready for Heroku. So the first thing I need to do is in my kind of the project level here, or sorry, the project level here, I'm going to make something called a proc file. And you can see this is the Heroku logo right there. So this is kind of, we're going to tell the Heroku which web service server we want to use for our app. So I'm going to add this. I'm going to say web Gunicorn. And then we'll call this one, wine API demo.wsgi. Or I'll just call this wine API. And then I'm going to pip install Gunicorn. So Gunicorn is the kind of server that Heroku recommends. So then I'm going to pip install something else called Django Heroku. Then in my settings.py, I'm going to import Django Heroku. And then at the bottom of settings.py, I'm going to say Django Heroku.settings, locals, like so. And all of the stuff I'm doing, by the way, is based off of the official documentation for Heroku and how to deploy a Heroku app. And then the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to, in the root, I'm going to, so up here, wait, no. So it says it wants to do it at the same level as all this. So new file here. I'm going to call this requirements.txt. Is that at the right level? Yep. And in requirements.txt, I'm going to write pip freeze requirements.txt. So this is going to be, Heroku uses this, txt, not text. We'll use this to download all of our dependencies, including Gunicorn and Django Heroku. And there's a few things we don't need to deploy here. So I'm going to also make a .gitignore. And I'm going to add venv. I don't need to deploy venv. And I don't need to deploy the PyCache. I'm telling it to ignore those. Next, I'm going to go to Heroku.com. And you'll need to create an account. So let's see if I can remember my login information.
No, do you know why this is free? What are they getting out of it?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Jason?
Do you know why this service is free? What exactly are they getting out of this?
So Heroku isn't 100% free. They start to charge you after a certain number of requests. The number of requests is high enough that, at least for this stage, you're not going to have to worry about it. But after a while, they do start to charge you. And I think they also have plans as well. So you can get a free plan and a not free plan.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I may Oh, come on. There we go. All right, so now I'm going to, now that I'm here, I'm going to log into, I'm in the dashboard. I'm going to create a new one, create new app. I'll call this Wine API. Oh, it has to have a dash, not an underscore. Oh, 9 AP, okay, so. I'm gonna hit create app.
In the app name, are we competing against everybody or just within our own
Yep.
name? Yeah. Oh,
This
so,
is
okay.
entire thing like that. All right, so now we're in the deploy tab. So we can choose a deployment method. So let's try Heroku get. And it says right here, so we're going to do Heroku login. All right, so it says you can close this page and return to your CLI. It should now be logged in. So we're in the project. We need to do a git init. And then we need to run Heroku get remote -a wine API Lima Platoon. We need to commit the application. So git add, git commit, deploying to Heroku. And then we're going to be git push Heroku master. Uh-oh, what does that say? Failed to push some refs. No default language. This. Failed to push some refs. That's not very helpful. It says no default language could be detected for this app. I'm going to look that up. So like Heroku, no default language could be detected for this app. So it says here, Heroku is a set of default build packs used when it needs to. So in order to do the detection, it runs bin/detect command of each of the default build packs. So that's for Node. So let's try it with, see if we can narrow this down to what about Django?
I seen something that said that you have to do a pull first, but because the upstream has some changes that you don't have when you did that init or something.
Yeah, we could try that. So we'll git pull Heroku master perhaps. Let me git pull master. Git pull Heroku.
You already have the CLI for Heroku installed?
Yeah.
It's been so long. I'll look. I'll try to help. Give me a minute.
Gonna try it one more time. Can I detect the build pack? So how do we get a build pack? Okay, here we go. Setting a build pack on an application. So Heroku build pack set Heroku/PHP. I don't think we want that. I think we want build pack Python, I'm assuming. So Heroku, and maybe we can say up here. Heroku build pack set Heroku Python. All right, I'll try running this command. All right, so now if I git push Heroku master. Oh, come on. It says app not compatible with build pack.
No, what did the last page say about your requirements text?
The last page?
Yeah, the last web page you were on was talking about right up there. Now go forward one, please. Wherever you were, yeah. Where did you follow that link? I'm just wondering if your requirements.txt was flushed out with pip freeze, if it would help.
All right, it says right here, requirement.txt must be present at the root of your application's repository. I did that. To specify the Python version, you also need a runtime.txt file. We're using the default Python runtime version, I think. So I think that should be okay.
When you did git init, did you actually add commit before you tried to push?
I did do a git commit.
I think I just missed when you did it.
I go up a bit, I should be able to see. Yep, here's my commit.
Yep.
No, on your requirements.txt, why are you running pip freeze there? Aren't you supposed to pip freeze and output to requirements.txt?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out.
Oh yeah, you need to have your dependencies in there.
All right.
Well, unless Heroku does that for you, like
Yeah.
that's the reason why you said you put it that way was Heroku's supposed to do it, but
Oh, wait a second. I don't think I'm supposed to put that in there. I'm supposed to run it.
Right, that's what I'm saying, because
Yeah.
requirements is supposed to have the packages.
Yeah, that'll output what your project needs to run, and then that way Heroku can actually run its default interpreter to install those packages.
Although it doesn't look like it updated.
No, I'm gonna try.
Are you in the right? You're not in the right level of directory to run that pip freeze, are you?
Yeah. There we go.
There you go. Yep.
Oh, okay. So I initted it at the wrong level. That may cause some issues. So I think I need to uninit this entire thing. Or maybe it'll be okay, because it hasn't really been pushed up or anything. I'm gonna try.
I mean, I would probably go delete that .git folder that is in the wrong spot, just to be, because I don't know what's going to happen if you re-init a folder above or wherever you were at. Yeah, I don't think your editor shows it.
Yeah.
Where did you do the init at originally?
Yeah, inside this part right here. So, all right. Okay, trying this one more time from the correct area now. All right, geez. From the top. Hopefully I don't think I have to log in again. Really deploying to Heroku. Git push Heroku master. There we go. So now it's detecting that this is a Python app.
I save.
Yep. So in short, make sure you know which level of your file that of your directory you're in when you do this. It's very important.
All right, and it automatically created the database. And then if we're actually trying to deploy this, I know there's certain things here within Django, and I think even in React about the debug mode. Would we, if we're actually trying to post this up as a real app, we'd have to turn that off before we post it to Heroku, or does that take care of it too?
I believe it takes care of it, but and let's see here. It says right here, it's gone to wine API limaplatoon.herokuapp.com. Okay. So thing with Heroku is sometimes Heroku can be a little unreliable. Let's see here. So you can check our logs for details, see if there's anything I did wrong here. But if not, if I run Heroku logs, it says no web process is running, so maybe it just needs some time. I am not entirely sure at this point, and we have been going at this for a while, so the steps are all there. Again, I'm not entirely sure exactly what's going on here yet.
Hopefully, I think you have
Hopefully
to move your proc file up to the same level as your requirements folder, because you're pushing that entire folder, right? With Wine API, I think you need your proc file actually up one level so it can start the process.
No, I think you might be right.
And then I think you might have to fix a reference in there because now you're one more folder up, and you have to point at actually we'll have to look and see. Yeah, you have to point it at the WSGI file still, so you have to change that reference to wine_API dot wine_API dot WSGI because you just went one up one folder.
All right, let's try that.
So Chris, that's application name dot folder dot file. Is that what we're looking at there?
Yeah, so you're telling GUnicorn, you're pointing GUnicorn at where that .WSGI file's at, and I think your proc file, did it move? It looks like it's still in your Wine API.
Oh, dang it!
Oh wait,
I thought I moved it.
It's really hard to see. It's really hard to see in VS Code, like the nestedness. You have to look super close to.
Yeah, no, it's still in that file for some reason. All right, gotta wait till this is done doing.
Yeah, but yeah, Kobe, basically when Noah puts the proc file up where requirements is at, you're basically like relative path pointing to the WSGI file. So you're saying from this point, look inside the Wine API folder, which is currently expanded. I wish I could draw on the screen.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, but it's from the WSGI.
I'm putting it back in the same place. Weird.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of how new file, like you have to actually select the folder that you want to create a file in, and VS Code catches me all the time with that.
Come on.
What if
we could always use a command line and copy move to.
Yeah. All right, so I always forget how you move something in command line.
MV space, the name of the file that you're in, and then the name of the file you want to have moved. This, so long as you're in the correct location, and then you'd have to put in the dot.
There we
just
go.
Move it up.
All right, cool. All right, one more time. Hopefully this will fix it. And if not, I'm out of ideas. Really fixed proc file this time. forgot to git add. Well, I did add.
Facilities are using Amazon.
Oh. There we go.
Third time's the charm.
All right. All right, it says it's deployed. All right. I followed the directions and it doesn't seem to be working. So I'm gonna call that a day for now because I know you all have you have a lot of work you need to get to today. So I would like you to start this afternoon after lunch by going over this tutorial yourself. And if one of you can figure out exactly what I'm doing wrong with Heroku, please let me know. And then we have another challenge this afternoon called Schools API.
So I did it this morning and it worked fine. So